Welcome to Season 2 of Demming Chronicles, where we focus on issues that are current and trending. We speak to persons whose ideas and information can make a difference to our country. Our aim is to nudge the conversation in a direction that helps us solve some of our wicked problems. We intend to change the conversation because we believe that if we change the conversation, we will change the behavior. Season 2 kicks off with two absolutely fabulous guests. Dr. Axel Kravatzky, welcome to the program.
Hi, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being with us. And our second guest, PhD candidate, Meagan Sylvester, welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on.
We look forward to a wonderful exchange of ideas between Axel and Meagan, and we'll be back shortly. Demming Chronicles Season 2, we continue, and Axel Kravatzky is with us. And you know, when I looked at his bio, I saw that Axel trains board members. And I wondered, what's the relevance of training board members? Tell me, why is that relevant?
Well, because board members have a very important task to do. So they are directing, they're overseeing, and they're accounting for the organization. And they need to balance, a very difficult balance to meet. That is, one is they need to look forward and outward and look at all the stakeholders that the organization impacts and the value they need to be creating given the changes coming over the years. And at the same time, they must be looking inside the organization and overseeing to ensure that the value that the organization is meant to create is actually being created.
Yes, and is there a difference between a board member in a private sector organization and one in a public sector organization?
Not much.
Not much of a difference.
No. Of course, there are differences, practically speaking, but their fiduciary duty is the same. So if it is a company, for example, it is the fiduciary duty is owed to the company, to the best interest of the organization. And now when you ask them, well, what is the best interest of the organization? They need to interpret that. The board, whoever the board is, whether it's privately owned or publicly owned, needs to determine what the best interest is. And that has been for too long, has been interpreted from one perspective, primarily from shareholders, as though they have a very special role to play. But they are just members of the organization and have a legal relationship with the organization. But the other stakeholders, like, for example, employees and communities and customers, suppliers, they all have a role to play.
But it's a hard task to ask people to think of the board from the employee's perspective. Historically, that has not been the discussion. So what has changed to make that become part of the discussion today?
Well, put in a very simple way, the game is up. You know, there's only so long that you can get away with things that don't work. And now with COVID, that has just exacerbated the trend, which was there before already. That the challenges, you need everybody to play together. Everybody is working on the same side, and everybody is trying to interpret the purpose of the organization and to fulfill it. And if one group thinks that they must direct and command and centrally, it will not work. And if you favor only one group as opposed to your responsibility to the others, you have very negative consequences. So, for example, poor work attitude, low innovation rates, bankruptcies, all these aspects are really evidence of bad governance.
Yes, but it's a hard, as I said before, it's really a hard sell to, for instance, sell to the unions that the board's interest is in this collaborative approach. So tell me a little more about how would a modern day board approach getting collaboration as the forefront of how we have our conversations?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing to do is is to become aware that we are living in a narrative that is not divinely given and that is not self-evident. So it is a relatively new sort of appearance in corporate life. So maybe in the last 30, 40, 50 years, that the shareholders have become sort of primary drivers in primacy. That was not always the case. And that is now rapidly fading away. And it is evident that all those involved in the organization, so that is those who give capital, you need to pay a decent return. Those who give labor, you need to pay a decent return. Those who in whose context you're operating and whose social infrastructure you operate, society, communities, they need to get a decent return. Customers, they need to be served, and they need to get value. And community suppliers, everybody, government needs to get a decent return. Taxes being paid with, because you're using the infrastructure, you're using the society. So all those involved in the production of value need to also receive their fair share part. And the evidence, fortunately now, the evidence is that those who do it get abnormal returns. You know, they get much higher returns than the others. The others are just naive and unfortunate.
Yeah. Let's switch the conversation from private sector to public sector, because Trinidad, as many other countries, have several state-owned enterprises. And we have historically selected our board members on the basis of, I would say, patronage. What are your comments on that? How can we change that?
Well, Trinidad and Tobago does have an abnormally high number of state enterprises, but it's a global trend, actually. You know, state enterprises have a role to play, and it's an ingrown role. And but the key thing to do is to look at what is the purpose of these organizations. And unfortunately, their purpose is almost explicit, a way to circumvent the public service and to complement, to facilitate purchases, to facilitate actions through something that you are not able or willing to reform, the other part. So, and it is also serving as an employment generation scheme. So those are the unofficial, almost unofficial, but I think they're close to being official purposes. And so but on paper, it says that, well, you should fulfill this policy. But I cannot give you the policy on paper because that is not exactly what I expect you to do. And so the right thing to do is to be explicit about what are the objectives that you're trying to fulfill. I think employment is a very important and worthwhile and should be supported, but say it is employment and try to give people skills to do something constructively, add value. So the biggest drawback, the biggest issue is that there is a duplicity of objectives, that one is official, the other one is unofficial. And as long as the unofficial dominates, you keep with the official version, even though it is pretty ridiculous.
All right. So, you commented that even if it is to provide employment, can you comment a little more on employment that does not necessarily generate money to support that employment, because it means taxpayers will be carrying the organization? And is that a modern day concept?
Well, I mean, there are different forms of dealing with unemployment and dealing with employment generation. So I'm not an expert on that, but I'm saying is that it is what I'm an expert on is the governance of it. And when you govern, be clear on what your objectives are. The duty of the board is to interpret what is our purpose, and the ministries that have these, that are supposed to govern these organizations, need to be clear on what is the purpose.
Okay.
And I think that is the major reason why there is no transparent and rigorous process, because otherwise you cannot possibly believe that doing something in a non-transparent, haphazard, rigorous way could possibly lead to good outcomes. I mean, it's shooting in the dark.
It is. And just before we wrap this interview, could you give me one of the biggest issues that you have seen in your board training activities? What would you say is the biggest common issue that you've seen that would be a stumbling block to persons functioning well on boards?
Yeah, I think most boards, so for example, when we do board evaluations in the private sector, public sector, non-profit sector, across countries, the biggest issue, I think, is that the board doesn't know how to assess its own performance, right? So they do not know what would high performance mean. Like, how can you manage your own performance? So they always rate themselves very low because they have no way to assess that. So they say, well, okay, we are doing a board performance, sort of a board evaluation, but that is not really performance. That is giving you feedback in order to reevaluate, to say, are we? But unless you are clear on what your objectives are, and there are three main outcomes that you need to produce, right? One is performance to your purpose. So are you creating the outcomes associated with your purpose? Secondly, are you a steward of the resources, of all capitals that you're using? Financial, human, intellectual, natural, for example, biodiversity. You know, we are using it up as though it is an infinite resource, but it is rapidly decreasing. And we are going to experience the effect of that very soon, as we already do. And so, steward of all the capitals. And thirdly, it needs to be an ethical organization. That is to say, it articulates what commitment it is making to the different stakeholders, and it is demonstrating the extent to which it is fulfilling those. You know, and those three aspects are the outcomes of good governance. And the extent to which you're able to do that, are you producing the value that you meant to? And profit is not it. Profit is an indicator, is a necessary ingredient, but it's not the purpose of any organization, right?
And thank you very much, Axel. And as we bring this interview to a close, I invite you to give us, what are your top, whatever, 3, 4, 5, 12, what are your top things that you would like to see happen in Trinidad and Tobago, and that will tell you that our governance structures are changing and are ready for the 21st century?
I don't know, I'm a pretty simple person. I think one thing would help, which is not paint with a broad brush, right? So Trinidad and Tobago, like many other countries, is a very diverse place. And it is not helpful to just say everybody is like that and everything is like that and everybody like that. No, actually, there's a really big difference. And there are organizations and there are people who are extremely competent, extremely capable, and who very much want to do better. And they should not be painted with the same brush. And the right people should find the right places so that together they can make the magic happen. And then demonstrate to the others who don't believe that that is possible, that it is not that difficult. It is not, you know, it just takes normal reasoning to do that. And the first step is, don't make it too simple. You know, don't just say everything is the same. And look at the actual opportunities and work with the skills of people, because when people come together with the right values on a common purpose, they can achieve absolutely wonderful things.
And on that note, thank you very much. On this edition, this season 2 of Demming Chronicles, we have an absolutely optimistic view by Dr. Kravatzky, talking about don't paint everyone with the same brush, that we all have different competencies, and if we fit ourselves and we collaborate, we are likely to have a better country. And that's it for this segment of Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back, Demming Chronicles Season 2. And on this segment, we chat with PhD candidate Meagan Sylvester. I know Meagan as a sociologist. I know her as someone who comments on music. I know her as someone who comments on calypso. Meagan, tell us, what brings you joy these days?
One of the most important things that I would say, and thank you very much, Denise, for having me on this program, is my concern about national development, but from a cultural perspective. Because as you would be aware, I am on the board of TUCO as the Education and Research Officer. And that portfolio in particular, it becomes important to have that thrust for culture to be dominant in our society, to take our society to the next level. So that's one of the things that actually gives me joy. Working with a team of people who are actually able to be involved in this process. Yes?
Yes, but when you talk about culture, we seldom see culture as part of development. We
Yeah.
see culture in a very culture and creativity. We see it in very narrow context. Can you share some of your views about what really is creativity and how does that impact national development?
Well, in particular, creativity, what creativity means to me is an expression, an indigenous expression from the persons who are resident in Trinidad and Tobago, but also those who would have migrated and they may come back, let's say for the carnival period, any expression that speaks to who we are as people in terms of Trinidad and Tobago. What is our identity and how do we express our identity? So we have music, we have dance, we have visual art, we have, for example, we're moving into what would have been the carnival season. We have stick fighting, we have painting. We have so many ways in which we can be creative in this society. We have steel pan music, playing so many various instruments. But of course, our steel pan is more dominant at this time because it really is indigenous to us. And so it becomes important when I think about the impact in terms of national development is how can we foster, even within these COVID times, a regeneration of an expression of our culture. Yeah.
But the purists among us will say to you that that expression doesn't have a dollar sign. And we need to link that creativity and that cultural expression with how can we earn income from both creativity and cultural expression.
Interestingly, because I am also a music researcher, most of the population should be aware, and even some of your viewers should be aware that there is research that speaks to the economic success of creativity and carnival as an indigenous festival. So if we look at the work of Keith Nurse and Joanne Tull and others who have said, listen, there are dollar signs that have been attributed in the past and can in the future be linked in a significant way to culture, it becomes important for us to tap into this. And more recent studies have to be done in terms of segmenting the various parts of our cultural expression to see exactly where the money can be made. And Denise, as I think about the response to COVID-19 and how have creatives and how have persons within the cultural sector actually been affected and how have they then sought to earn a living in these times. We look at the work of Kenny Phillips through WAC Radio and WAC TV, and we look at what he has been producing since, March or April, May of 2020. And when we look back, we see that there has been a constant increase of shows being put on. People go to his studio at the WAC studio in San Fernando, and depending on whatever restrictions we have, you have enough persons in that studio to have performers be on that stage and get access to that international space. And so because it is linked to GoFundMe, that would have been one of the first ways in which performers and creatives could have started to earn a living, even within COVID times. So we see that there is promise and there is evidence to back up the contribution as well as the dollar signs for the creative sector.
But what are the systems and structures that we need to put in place that will help artists and creative persons thrive? What are the things that they need?
Well, in particular, if I look to the government providing funding opportunities, there needs to be more than just a handout. There needs to be a redevelopment of the importance of the creative sector, the importance of culture to Trinidad and Tobago, and also from the ministry that has that responsibility, a sit-down session, stakeholder sessions, not just to talk about what exists, but how can we plan together, creatives, members of the cultural sector, and the government. So we're talking about that tripartite arrangement to really sit to say, okay, what are the numbers, who is performing, where do we want to go? And so instead of it being a handout, it's a structured, strategic process of support. Because I am not, from where I sit, I don't think that people just want to get handouts. People want to be part of an industry. They want to be part of a working system. But they need a catalyst to come from that governing body.
So you're saying that the catalyst resides with the governing body. And oftentimes I would hear the governing body say that, but we had a symposium, we had, we spoke with people, what else do you want? So it seems as if there's some kind of gap. And I wonder if we could talk a little about what is that gap that exists between the governors who often approach this thing as handouts and the creative persons who want to continue to make a contribution, but they want to earn just as well as the doctor, the lawyer, the whatever else. What is the gap there?
Immediately, I would say that there is a perception that the cultural sector does not add value. And I think that then redounds to the members of that sector. And when you feel undervalued, you are reluctant to engage in discussion at a particular level. So for the first thing I think that needs to be done is there needs to be a new view, perception, understanding of the role of creatives in our society. When creatives then see that they are valued, they then come to the table with renewed vim and vigor, as it were, to sit down and have a discussion. But we need to have all hands on deck. So when we talk about Trinidad and Tobago, we know that we have a Tobago Festival Commission or organization. We know that we have several organizations in Trinidad. We need to have the heads of these organizations, representatives of these organizations sitting down together as a group and then going with strategic approaches to the government. So as I said, it's not about cap in hand. It's not about waiting for handout, but it's going as a group, legitimately saying, listen, we can add value to this society. But of course, what becomes critically important is that in a society where oil, gas, and the manufacturing sector have been, larger than life, it becomes quite a challenge for that sector, the cultural sector, to be taken seriously. So that is also, there needs to be buy-in about the value that the sector can bring to national development.
Yes, and what I was just reminded of as you talked about the oil and gas sector and the manufacturing sector is that people do not see creativity in those sectors. Do you have a comment on that?
In terms of oil and gas?
In terms of creativity, is there creativity in the traditional areas? And how do we see that?
It becomes important for us to see who we are as Trinidadians and Tobagonians. How do we express ourselves? Because this is the point I was making at the beginning. We have creative expression and it comes out in so many ways. And so we have to start tapping into how do we express our identity? Because this whole issue about cultural sector and creativity is about various ways in which Trinidadians and Tobagonians express themselves. And so in every aspect of our lives, there's going to be creativity. The way that we approach, the way that we look at each other in society. So it becomes important to see, as I was mentioning, music. There are so many genres of music that are produced in Trinidad and Tobago, or that where we have persons involved. You're talking about the fusion music, you talk about calypso as mother music, you talk about soca and its derivatives, you talk about the chutney, you talk about the groovy, you talk about the raga, you talk about the parang soca. There's so many facets if we just look at music alone. But then we know that we have steel pan music, right? Then we know we have visual artists. And then, we have painters, we have drummers, we have drumology, and there's so much creativity. And so it becomes important for us to start looking at who we are instead of thinking that we are only one thing, which is, as I said, this heavy, unnatural reliance on only oil, gas, and the manufacturing sector. That becomes problematic in terms of our approach, in terms of looking at ourselves.
Yes. As you talked about the various genres of music, soca, and so on, I was involved in another activity, and the international platform did not have a category called soca. So that Trinidad music was then lumped under, I think it was lumped under reggae music. How could we ensure that that genre, soca, or whatever the genre that we have, gains international acceptance and even recognition? Any thoughts on that?
Indeed. What becomes important is hits. But hits are generated by production, meaning when an individual who's not from Trinidad and Tobago hears a song, here's a sample of a song, something that's linked to soca or sounds like something that is soca, they must be able to have access. So what becomes important for us is to take it to the engine room. We need to produce more, and we need to have our productive elements be readily available on the World Wide Web. Now, this may sound very trivial, but that is actually what allows for that visibility internationally. Reggae music and dancehall music has that visibility because of the productive element and the fact that they are involved in that international space in another kind of way. And so what we need to do, so we have our stars. We have our stars who have done that work, but we need to have more of that. So when we talk about the contribution of a Marshall Montano, so you click on a video, you click or you do a Google search, and it's simple like that, because somebody in Finland, somebody in Switzerland wants to access our music. They must not only just hear it and not know where to find it. And that is what becomes more important for us. But of course, that productive element is fueled by dollars and cents. And persons have to be, they have to have the funding. They must have it to be able to produce. So you see, it's a circle, it's a cycle, and it's very cyclical. But it involves all of the elements that I've been mentioning before. The government, the creatives, and other members within the industry.
What advice do you have for creatives in this time in which we've seen so much of their activities just shut down? 2021 is a new year. It's a new opportunity. It's a different opportunity. What advice do you have for the creatives and the typical artists, musicians, painters, dancers, and so on?
Keep performing. Keep performing. But keep performing and record your performances. So even if we're talking about, because of the conditionalities that exist as a result of COVID, if you're going to do a performance in your backyard, you're going to gather the required amount of persons based on the COVID protocols, and you're going to record those sessions. And you're going to get an opportunity to put those recorded sessions in the mainstream. Let people see you performing, because performers want to perform, but people want to see performances. And so this is not the time to get despondent, because if there was no COVID, this would have been the height of the Trinidad and Tobago music industry period. And so this is a time to continue doing that work. We started towards the latter end of 2020 as persons became accustomed to, this is the new reality. This COVID is here with us for a while. Keep performing, but make sure that you link together and you get performance spaces. So if you are unable to record where you are, get to studios. People are doing the recordings. I mentioned WAC earlier. Team up with other persons who are doing recordings and make sure that your content is there. So you have 2020 content, you have 2021 content, even in the midst of COVID-19, because it's all about visibility and accessibility to make a change in the creative sector.
And as we bring this interview to a close, Meagan, if you had a magic wand and you could dream or take some action or cause something to happen or some set of actions to happen to change and make our industry or creative sector thrive, what would you do?
Interesting question. I think it becomes important for stakeholders to get together. That magic wand will be waved on all of the heads of those persons who have the responsibility and have the capacity to bring about change. But one of the things that I would want as I'm waving that wand is for them to start to respect the creative sector and to respect creativity. And there's creativity in so many ways. And we need to start seeing ourselves as creative people, firstly. And so as we do that, as I wave that wand, I'm saying, we are creative, we are creative, we are creative. And let's take that creativity to the next level. So that would be the first thing that I would want for Trinidad and Tobago. Government sees the creativity, the creatives see themselves in a different light, and we all come together to make a fundamental change in this creative sector.
Thank you very much, Meagan. And on today's program, we spoke with Dr. Axel Kravatzky, and his key message was that you can't have a single story. Do not paint everyone with one brush. He's very, very hopeful that in terms of governance, our country can change. In terms of selections of board and board performance, as long as those things are codified and clear, we'll be fine. And we also had an exciting discussion with PhD candidate Meagan Sylvester. And her thing about the magic wand is that we all need to collaborate. Let's come together so that when the magic happens, it happens with all of us. She's very clear that once you record your music and you curate your music and you put it onto the internet or you put it onto your own page, you use social media, then things will change. But her key message to our creators is to continue to do. This is not the time to stop. Demming Chronicles, Season 2. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back with you next time. And until then, stay safe.